Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Harley Quinn. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I loved it. Literally, Harley and Ivy are having like this like fuck, marry, kill conversation, and then Harley notices that there's like a dude at the bar that looks a lot like Joker, and then I love her being like, oh yeah, like Ivy's like, oh that's not him, you know, he doesn't have that green hair, the pale skin, the bloodlust in his eyes, or those red lips, and she's like, yeah, that was actually my lipstick. It's like, come on, you're such a like, you do all this villainous shit, but you can't buy your own makeup, come on. But the fact of the matter is, the whole conversation is like, and then it's like revealed because like apparently like there are like conspiracy theories about the Joker on Wayne Tube and stuff. And the fact is, I love that, you know, it's like Ivy was like, holy shit, that really is him when you put the makeup on him and everything. So it's like, what happened is like maybe the acid that made him, you know, the kind of that he was going to use to undo her, maybe it undid him, and now he's no longer the Joker. So she wanted to avoid him because she's like, yeah, for the first time I don't want to cause a scene, which is kind of weird hearing that come from her. But they interact with the dude, and he's like, oh, I got kids and stuff. I was immediately like, oh, this has got to be a front. He's lying. He's pretending to be some normal dude. I'm like, did you kidnap some kids? Did you pretend to have some kids? I was like, what's up with this? But then he even brings it up later on. He's like, oh, my girlfriend's kids. I'm like, okay, so are you playing a long game here? But even Ivy was like, oh, he's lying. But Harley's like, no, let's leave him alone because people can change, which Ivy was like, no, people can't, basically saying that people at their core always stay the same, that they are who they are. But I love Harley being like, well, look at me. I was, you know, a psychologist, and I always had my hair up. And then Ivy was like, yeah, but when I met you, I got to look in your eyes, and I always knew that you were a crazy bitch. And she's like, oh, thank you. But we kind of get like a flashback into like Arkham. This is a really good kind of like, even like further kind of origin story, kind of us being able to witness Harley and Joker's first meet. Also, everyone, like, I love that little subtle differences because like everyone's got like longer hair and stuff like that. Like Ivy looks crazy, like with like the long hair, like the black marks on her eyes and stuff like that. Jim looks like he's in good shape. Even he's still got that Batman thing of like, oh, so what are you doing tonight? He's like, stopping the Joker's bomb, and it's like, oh yeah, I mean, yeah, of course. But after that, then you also run into Dent. Obviously, he hasn't become Two-Face yet because it's just like several years beforehand. So it's also interesting to know, like, timeline-wise, like what villains were where. Like, obviously, like a lot of Batman's villains are already established because we saw Man-Bat, we saw Scarecrow, obviously, we saw Calendar Man, and Riddler. I even love like when Harley was walking past and he was making some joke about her, and she's like, huh, the joke's on you because that was my minor, not my major. And he's like, oh, the joke is on me. And he looks at his brush and his hair's coming out. He's like, I was like, wow, it looks weird seeing Riddler with hair. I mean, more often than not, most iterations I see of Riddler, he isn't bald. This is the only version, but I guess it's playing with the like thing of like everyone just like had wild ass hair back then or something. It's crazy. Even love how, and I also love that they showed like, oh, Dent wasn't the best person, even he was an asshole before he became Two-Face, because he's just kind of like, oh yeah, because it's like, oh, we got 24 hours, yeah, before the polls close, and he was like, no, and like Gordon's like, no, till the bomb goes. Like, sure, did I say the polls? I meant the bomb, right? And it's like, it's just all about like, oh, can I count on your vote? Even them being like, oh, we hired you, we didn't even know you wrote a thesis and stuff like that, we brought you in because you're young and you're cheap. The fact of the matter is every other therapist has been chewed out and spit out by the Joker, so we wanted, you know, that's why we got you for this job and everything. So her actually going in, sitting with the Joker. Isn't the guard that's with him, like the long hair, isn't that one of the cops that works for Gordon? Because isn't her hair like short now? Like I said, that's what I feel like. And even Joker looking with the wild like mane hair, it's crazy. And him being like, hey, pudding. And she's like, what? And he's like, oh, sorry, I thought you were my pudding. And then Luigi shows up with his pudding and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, I love that being a bit. And so Harley trying to like get close to Joker and stuff like that. And, you know, she's talking to him about like, oh yeah, what's your obsession with Batman? He's like, oh, I know what you're here for. You're here for the bomb and stuff like that. And pretending like he can't hear her. But she actually goes inside his cell and everything, and it turns into a little scrap, and he actually enjoys it because she really kicks his ass because it's like, oh yeah, you're a therapist and athletic or acrobatic and stuff like that. So, but it turns out like obviously he was playing a little game with her, being like, oh, like I can't wait to kind of play again, Harley. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then, you know, Jim getting pissed at her and is like, oh, that was a stupid thing you did, turning your gun in your badge. And she's like, I don't have either one of those. He's like, turning your clipboard and your glasses. Because the glasses thing makes me think of when he was like putting on the glasses, like, all right, psychotic, blah, 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 and cute. She's like, I didn't write that. He's like, yeah, but you were thinking it, weren't you? But nevertheless, I love they're like, oh, what are we going to do about this? Like, oh, someone's got to get in there to get about this bomb situation. Batman walks out. I can do it. I can get Joker to talk. And Harley's like, holy crap, was he standing there the entire time? It's actually interesting because there's actually a frame. Not unless it's just me being crazy, but actually if you go back, like they show that corner where Batman comes out of beforehand, you can actually still see the shadow of his outline like there. So it's just an interesting continuity thing that I noticed. I was like, oh, you can actually see like the moment he comes out of the shadows, you can see where he comes out at, and you're like, oh, you can actually see him, not unless that's lighting from something like the shadow of something else, but I'm pretty sure that was him. So I was like, oh, once again, just me being me. And it's like, all right, I can get Joker to talk, and Batman proceeds to kick his ass. I thought was so interesting, beating the crap out of him, and he's just like, tell me where the bomb is. It's like, oh, you know who knows where it is? Robin, or should I say Jason Todd. Oh, but he's dead because I killed him. I was like, ooh, and Batman proceeded to kick his ass, which is also interesting because obviously, you know, like he's on Damian, so obviously he's been through some Robins. He's been through Dick Grayson, Jason Todd, you know, and Tim Drake, obviously. But it just made me wonder because obviously Barbara's only becoming Batgirl now, and I guess it also depends on the continuity because Barbara's usually Batgirl when Dick is still Robin, right? I think that's how that continuity lines up. I'm not gonna say everything has its own continuity anyway, but it's just interesting to be like, okay, so because it's not like, oh, Damian's the first Robin. There have been other Robins. It's like in particular we know like, oh, at the very least he's had a Jason Todd before. It's interesting too because obviously this DC universe and obviously Jason Todd kicking it in Titans and stuff like that. It just makes me think of that. But nevertheless, I was like, ugh. And I even love like the blood splatter and stuff like that, and it lands on Dent's face, and you see like half the blood covering his face. I'm like, I like that. I like that a lot. I also love that he's got those that candy, and he's offering it to Batman. And then Jim's like, oh, I'd love one. He's like, oh, sorry, last one. And then he's like, wait. He offers Batman more, and then Jim's like, I thought you said you didn't have any more. He's like, yeah, I just found him. It's just like, you're such a dick, Dent. But Harley talks to Ivy because Ivy can help her with the whole situation of Joker because they were in, you know, a therapy group together. So she was like, how do I reach? It's like, oh yeah, the last therapist, Joker killed him because they brought up his family and he didn't like that. So she's like, thanks, and kind of goes to talk to him. She's like, oh, I'm not here about the bomb, I'm here about you, you know, because even like I think basically Joker saying that literally, I mean, and this actually plays into the title of the episode that basically every inmate in Arkham has daddy issues. So it's like, oh, he's like, all right. You want to know how I got these emotional scars? I'm like, yes, I love that you did that. That's so good. Because truth be told, is like, especially his aesthetic, and maybe that's what they're going for, immediately me thinks of like Heath Ledger's Joker, like kind of like how his makeup was very like messy. It wasn't like clean like it typically is even in the show, like, well, because obviously it's like his skin is bleached, whereas like in it's still just like makeup he put on, but like even the rest of it, like the eyeliner, his hair being messy, even like his lip being messy, it heavily reminds me of Heath Ledger's. I wonder, I would assume it was inspired by that, especially because they used that line of, do you know where I got these emotional scars instead of just scars? But I thought that was interesting. Basically, we got backstory on Joker. I was like, holy crap, because a lot of stuff kind of steers away from it. Like the only thing that like dived deep into Joker's past is like Gotham, at least that I'm aware of. I'm not sure like how many comic books really take a deep dive into it. I don't think too many do, but you know, because a lot of people weren't too fond of like Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, because they were like, I don't need an origin story for Joker because he typically doesn't. It's just like this thing of chaos. Just leave it at that. But nevertheless, the fact is, he brought up the fact is like, Mr. Ferris, my ferret. Basically, he told the story about like having an abusive dad. He didn't eat because his dad was banging the maid and she was too busy to actually feed him. And he wakes up and it's like, oh, like the cage was going. My dad was over me with a big smile on his face, and he was beat. And then I remember him beating the shit out of me. And he's like, yeah, and he started laughing, and I didn't get what was so funny, but he was like, basically, it made him realize that's the thing, like about jokes. Not everybody's going to get it. I was like, dude, and he's like, he starts laughing. He's like, ha ha. I was like, oh my god, did we get some? I was like, dude, that was fucked up and dark and crazy that we got that. I was like, holy shit. And even Harley been like, holy crap, when you're opening, he's like, oh yeah, like the fact is I just want to be treated like a normal prisoner, normal food and stuff like that. I'm like, now I know you're bullshitting. I don't know about that other story. You might have slid in some truth, but I was like, oh, all you speaking right now is 100% bullshit. I know that is the case just because you were like, oh, no, I don't want to do it weekly now. It has to be tonight. I'm like, it has something to do about the bomb. I even love Batman being like, beginner's luck, because she was able to get information out of Joker. Which I just thought that was interesting. Her giving Ivy a plant. It's like, yeah, you claim to hate all humans, but the fact of the matter is, hey, you helped out and everything. So, kind of giving her something. So it's like, oh, you see the beginnings of there being a relationship there. It's like, oh, like this is kind of what would eventually become, them being BFFs. So I thought that was pretty dope. But then it turns out, like, obviously it was all a lie. I love Gordon riding in the Batmobile, because even being like, oh yeah, like, shouldn't we, carpool, planet and all that stuff, right? And it's like, oh, can I be in front? I wonder how soon after, because even Joker was like, oh, too soon to be about the Jason Todd thing. So, because he's like, oh, if I could just adjust my shoulders a little bit, I could get in the front, and Batman wouldn't let him. I'm like, yeah, probably because of the whole Jason Todd thing. So it's probably a thing of like, yeah, you're not getting up there front with him, because it's like, that's where Robin sits, type of situation. Who knows? But they show up at the Little Italy. Turns out the bomb's not there, and it's like, oh, and Gordon being like, oh, so you wanna get something while we're here? I'm like, I love how, like, you're a hot mess now, but it's like you're at least somewhat professional, but you had a layer of being kind of a mess back then too. But then it turns out the Little Italy they were talking about was Luigi, and poor bastard explodes. Because I love Joker being like, oh yeah, I like coming here because of Luigi's food, and also because of Batman. But the fact of the matter is, he's like, oh, this could be like our first date. Because he's like, oh, look at you. The fact of the matter is, you made it seem like you cared about like the bomb and stuff like that. He's like, no, you just cared about the story you will be able to write and stuff like that. So, which the Joker wasn't mad at that. And he's like, oh, like the fact of the matter is, like when the bomb goes off, he's able to escape. It's like, oh, like I'm gonna make you famous, like because you got the story of the clown prince of crime and stuff like that, And she's kind of just like, let me go and stuff. And it's like, they'll kill us. And Joker's like, oh, they won't do that if I got you. But then like, you have Dit being like, shoot them. It's like, I can't while he's got her. If I can't win, I can't get elected, let something like this happen, the Joker escaping, I can't let that happen. So they were firing. Luck, I was wondering like, oh, what was going to happen? But it's like Ivy protected her. And Joker being like, oh, Ivy, I knew you always had a special place in your heart for me. It's like, no, I don't care about you. It's like, but the fact of the matter, she's like, no one's ever given me a gift before, so I'm looking out for Harley. So I thought that was super sweet. But then like Dit being like, kill all of them, because there's like an article like he was trying to get voted on. It was like 17. They could basically make it so you can burn the inmates and stuff like that. And basically he was like, kill them all. And then like Ivy was like, I surrender. And she's like, okay, I could use a new therapist and stuff like that. And Harley's like, okay. So Ivy gets dragged away, and it's like, oh, that's super sweet. But I love the whole situation of Dit being like, hey, like, glad you're okay and everything. And she spits in his face, and it's like Two-Face. And I'm like, oh. And then she comes back, and then like, it's present day Ivy's like, bullshit. You came up with Two-Face? And she's like, yeah, I haven't seen any royalties of it either. I'm like, that's so dope. You actually gave him that nickname, and he will never probably credit you for it. It's like, oh, it makes you wonder who, because I mean, it's a joke, because like the only, like, we never really know too much about where a lot of villains get their names. Certain people do. Like, certain shows kind of focus on it. Like, we kind of understand where Penguin got the name Penguin in Gotham and stuff like that, for example. We know, like, in, like, The Flash, for example, Cisco, like, names all the metahuman villains they come across, So, there's sometimes explanations for it. But I love that being a thing. So, for her, it's like, the fact of the matter is, that shows you at the heart of it. She's like, people can change. You didn't care about humans beforehand, but I gave you a gift and you cared about me. So she's like, I win, I'm right. And she's like, God, shut up. Why you have to be so smug about it? But she's like, no, like, I didn't always hate people. She's like, I used to actually care about people, Mr. Ferris. And she's like, Mr. Ferris, what's this have to do with Joker's, ferret? And she's like, no, Mr. Ferris was like, what was it, it was a plant of hers. And it's like, yeah, Joker probably just took the story and ran with it, like, because I said it in group therapy one time, and she's like, holy shit, all this like stuff I did about like ferrets and stuff like that, and it was all a lie. And it's like, well, yeah, that's what Joker does, he lies. But it was like, but then because the moment it happened, I had to pause. I was like, but that means everything else Joker said about that story happened to Ivy. I was like, damn, dude, you came from an abusive situation. Like, she's like, the moment her dad hit her is when she stopped caring about humans until she met Harley. I was like, that's, once again, it was messed up with Joker, but now it's almost like, oh man, like, hearing she came from such adversity, also like to realize like, oh, like, interestingly enough, Harley's what restored her humanity and like her faith in humanity to a certain extent. Like, most people she doesn't give a shit about, but you know, she does about Harley, just because, and Harley ended up being the one exception. I was like, that's so interesting. So it's like, okay, so what do we do about this Joker thing? They need its tiebreaker, bring in Dr. Psycho. He's reading Joker's mind, well, quote unquote Joker's mind, and it's like nothing prior to, like, nothing before the accident, so he doesn't remember being Joker and stuff like that. But you know, him and Harley and Ivy are seeing in his mind, and it's like, oh, look at all this disgusting shit about him and his family. It's like, oh, gross. And they don't even see that. It's kind of enough reason to kill him on his own, but it's like, nah, we'll just leave him be. I guess Joker's just gone, so it's like, oh, like, it's like someone did acid or something. I guess that acid did something to him, and then Dr. Psycho's like, yeah, that's why I only he's like, that's why I stick to weed or something like that. He made like a drug joke, and he's like, oh, fuck you, that was good, that was funny. Papa needs a nap after it or whatever. So it's like, okay, they walk away and leave, and it's like, oh, like I said, it was a nice kind of origin story at the same time. But then we see like he's looking at the phone, he gets a text from his kids, or his girlfriend's kids, and he's laughing, and he's like, goes into his Joker laugh. He's like, ha ha ha, and then he like kind of calls, he's like, and then he kind of readjusts himself. I was like, that's so interesting. So he might not remember who he is as the Joker, but it's still there, and it might just take the right thing to trigger it, especially because his kids were covered in sauce. I was like, oh, it kind of reminds you of like people being covered in blood. I was like, oh, I expected him to go full Joker, but it's going to be interesting. Like, it seems like they're setting that up to be like, oh, like eventually the Joker is going to rise again. So it will probably be a situation where Harley later on is going to be like, I should have killed the Joker, which is interesting because, like, was it not last week, but the week before last, we learned that apparently in the Arrowverse, at least on Earth 1, well, what is now Earth Prime now, Bruce killed the Joker. So that's just interesting. Once again, I tied it into Titans, how like in the season 1 finale, like Dick, like I was in that fake world that Trigon made, and it's like all those villains were being killed by Bruce, and it started with him killing the Joker. Well, almost killing the Joker, but then killing the Joker. So it's just interesting how that ties together. I mean, to be fair, this is his arch nemesis. Like, if he was going to cross that line with any villain, it'd make the most sense to be with him. But at the same time, it's like, oh yeah, Two-Face ends up taking Harley and Ivy, and it's like, oh, he's DEA again. So, like I said, a lot of really interesting things went down. I'm curious to see ultimately where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.